Chilla's Art is an indie studio consisting of two brothers from Japan, who are masters at using G-horror tropes and atmosphere to create truly unsettling games. What makes this studio unique is its habit of taking everyday settings such as convenience stores or apartments and transforming them into a gallery of horrors that force you to question every decision you make. In this video, I'll discuss common themes present in Chilla's Art games to showcase why they are so scary, and I will also prove that some of these games take place within a shared universe. To start things off, let's talk about why Chilla's Art is rapidly gaining recognition within the niche of community of horror game enthusiasts. It basically fills a void that existed since PlayStation 2 days, and that's the lack of psychological horror games that rely on ambience and tension rather than cheap jump scares and plots so shallow that they are practically transparent. As much as I love action-focused horror games like Resident Evil and Dead Space, there is special place in my jaded heart for narrative-driven horror masterpieces like Silent Hill. Chilla's Art attempts to satisfy your cravings, one blocky-looking indie game at a time. While their games aren't famous for amazing graphics, Chilla's Art has certainly mastered the art of using ugly, low-poly models to enhance the creepy atmosphere. Every time a barely animated NPC shambles into your view, looking like a demonically possessed mannequin, you definitely feel an increasing sense of isolation and distrust, like you're stuck in a nightmare. One that's populated by few soulless automatons, all of whom are conspiring to steal your soul, so you become one of them. And that's the common theme in all Chilla's Art games, and is demonstrated especially well in The Closing Shift, which itself is inspired by the convenience store, another Chilla's Art game. In The Closing Shift, you work as a barista in the local cafe, serving food and drinks to customers. But almost immediately upon starting your playthrough, there's this lingering sense in your mind that something is off. I mean, it's way too quiet, even though you're supposedly in the middle of a busy Japanese suburb. And you encounter your first weird-looking NPC in the parking lot as you're trying to get to work. And when you hand over a phone that you found a few seconds ago, he jumps up like a slinky. While most will write this off as a result of two brothers making games in their bedroom with the low budget, I feel like it's a deliberate artistic choice. By making people around you move and act weird, Chilla's Art subtly conveys the feeling that something is not right. Coupled with the unnatural lack of background noise or music, this adds tension and character to everyday locations that would normally walk past without a second thought. Once inside the cafe, you encounter your first batch of customers. Again, their looks and animations feel unnatural, with not a lot of variations of how they talk and move. Some just stand there like plants, talking about how there is something strange going on in the neighborhood. Others will move in the groups, with their motions perfectly matching together, as if they're performing a circus act. And while the game plays it off as normal, you, as the player, feel a bit uneasy. This uneasiness adds up over time, as you learn more about the place and the people inhabiting it. Gradually, weird things start happening, like the power cutting out abruptly, or milk randomly spilled on the floor instead of being inside the fridge, even though you're the only person with the access to that part of the shop. Despite having a limited budget, Chilla's Art games always feature worlds that don't seem too different from our own. Food items, buildings, streets, signs, and notes have a decent bit of detail, which makes the world feel like an actual place where people live. The level of details in these inanimate objects stands in stark contrast to the jerky motion and creepy design of NPCs, adding an uncanny valley spirit to each game. Clearly, something isn't right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. One benefit of having non-existent game budget is that you get to reuse a bunch of assets in subsequent releases. Nothing to be ashamed of. Even AAA studios do this stuff all the time. But Chilla's art ones up everyone else by turning this game design trick into a world-building mechanic. Do you remember the cafe I was talking about earlier from the closing shift? Well, it's also present in Chilla's art later release, Parasocial, in which you're a female VTuber who streams video games. While playing Parasocial, you visit this cafe, and the most interesting detail is that a woman, similar to your player character from the closing shift, can be seen at the back, preparing food and drinks for customers, as her face remains hidden. Also, the high schoolers we saw in the closing shift, Marie and Mayumi, appear to be a whole damn adults with corporate jobs now. And that's not all. Parasocial also contains references to previous Chilla's art games. One of them is Akamanto, a retro-styled survival horror game that Chilla's art released in 2019. In entertainment, this trope is often referred to as canon welding, where two previously unrelated IPs are made to exist within a shared universe. Parasocial is the first time Chilla's art explicitly acknowledges the existence of two games within a shared universe. However, it can be inferred that some of their previous games also exist within the same world, despite the developers not including any obvious references. You see, a lot of the stories and monsters, ghosts in Chilla's art games are based on Japanese urban legends, like Akamanto, who is often described as spiteful red-hooded ghost with the mask that haunts public bathrooms. Hanako is another spirit. This one haunts school toilets. In the Chilla's art game, she is portrayed as a schoolgirl who hurt herself and bled to death in the bathroom. The dark, sinister world of Chilla's art games is probably based on our own reality. Inunaki Tunnel is a real place. It's in Miyakawa town. And just like the game, people have often turned up dead in this tunnel. The two brothers making these games definitely don't shy away from references to horror movies and TV series that inspired them. Not quite clear ending from the closing shift is taken directly from episode 8 of Horror Accidental, a Japanese TV horror series. In a way, most Chilla's art games feel like playing an interactive horror movie from 1980s. This sensation is further reinforced by the film grain effect and various other VHS artifacts that are included by developers on purpose. Little touches like this make Chilla's art games stand out from your typical indie horror shovelware. Chilla's art games also contain several references to both the developers and various real-life franchises. For instance, in Parasocial, you pick up your phone to order food from an app called Uber Eats. I guess it's hard to convince the real Uber Eats to license their product within your creepy horror game. Besides, who is going to pay those license fees? Too big and already successful corporation. Then you have Chilla's coffee logo, which bears an uncanny resemblance to the Starbucks logo that overpriced sugary drink enjoyers around the world are familiar with. Chilla's art also populates their game levels with carefully placed chinchilla plushies that are Easter eggs, referring of course to the studio that makes the games. Apart from references to urban legends and horror movies, Chilla's art games also feature many recurring tropes. Not often a Chilla's art game is set during a daytime, an obvious choice given the genre of these games. After all, nobody will be scared if everything is lit up perfectly and the streets are bustling with the commuters. Setting the games at night in a not densely populated environment is a genius decision. First, the fear of the unknown is much greater than anything you can imagine. Your mind will conjure up horrors that may or may not be real, and a good horror game keeps up the tension, so you can never truly rest at peace for a single moment. The abandoned buildings subconsciously inform your mind that you've got nowhere to run and nobody to ask for help. help, and the few characters you do come across are never entirely trustworthy. Multiple endings are another mechanic inherent to Chilla's art games. Depending on choices you make and the dialogue options you select, you get one of 2 to 4 endings. Usually there is never a good ending to these games. Either the main character is killed off if it's a supernatural horror, or they end up in a situation that doesn't fully resolve the core conflict of the game. Given the dark tones and gloomy settings of each game, this is unavoidable. This is the world where major subjects like self-harm, stalking, unaliving, and mental degradation are often explored in relation to various characters within each story. Paranormal beings, undead creatures, ancient curses, and other eldritch horrors await you in several Chilla's art games. So it's only natural that the main character has higher chance of ending up on a missing poster than staying a sane and healthy individual after the final act. Puzzles are also a recurring theme in Chilla's art catalog. You occasionally come across one in games like Hanako and the Convenience Store, but they aren't particularly hard. These puzzles exist to build the tension, like who is sneaking up on me as I solve this, or to progress the main story by unlocking an item or note. Most protagonists in Chilla's art games are young women, and they're also generally faceless. There are exceptions like Parasocial, in which you get to see the face of your character. In some games like The Bathhouse, Caregiver, Eevee, and The Night Way Home, you also have a name. By using average woman armed with nothing more than a flashlight as the player character, Chilla's art games instill a sense of fear within you. Everything you do is a reaction, controlled entirely by the direction of the plot and its antagonists. Developers have control over your fears, funneling you into situations where you see what they want you to. And that's quite scary. The final trope I want to talk about is a workplace horror. This is a scenario where you're an everyday worker who gradually gets dragged into a web of conspiracies and supernatural phenomena at your workplace. Parasocial, The Convenience Store, and The Closing Shift are the excellent examples of a workplace horror done right. Games like Night Delivery also fall into this category, although some would classify it as a comfort horror, since a lot of the game involves interacting with weird and quirky apartment dwellers as you stroll around sluggishly, dropping off packages. But oh boy, do things get dark towards the end of the game. Personally, I don't consider horror games a very therapeutic experience. Comfort horror never really landed with me, but I guess they are the Diet Coke of horror. Not exactly healthy, but less toxic than the usual stuff, and you're under the illusion that it's better for you. Now comes the part where I talk about what makes Chilla's art games so scary, and we all collectively wonder why so few studios follow these rules, despite them being so painfully obvious. The first and most important one is that less is more. Instead of drowning the soundscape with techy background music, Chilla's art just keeps it dead silent, because it uplifts the natural ambience of your environment. There's a scene in Parasocial where you're streaming on the orders of a stalker who's been harassing you with text messages and private photos of yourself in your own apartment. Shortly after you turn on the stream, there's a loud explosion, followed by a brief period of silence, and then you start hearing the sound of your TV.
僕の話なんて誰も聞いてくれない。
Who turned it on when you locked every door and you were the only person in the house? The eerie silence leading up to this moment creates even more tension that you would get from some ominous soundtrack buzzing on the background. Silence also enhances the effect of jump scares, and I must admit that Chilla's art games have some pretty good ones. Not the linear, predictable jump scares you see in the terrible horror movies these days, but ones that genuinely take you by surprise. without being cheap or overwhelming. There's another well-executed jump scare in the radio station, as you're driving from one village to another in your car. Along the way, your car suddenly breaks down for no apparent reason. As you're trying to get it moving again, something doesn't quite feel right. If you turn your view towards the rear window, you can see the face of a ghostly creature pressed up against it. This jump scare is entirely optional, and you might not even notice it if you're not paying attention, but developers put it there. Bits like this underscore the attention to detail present in literally an indie horror game made by two guys. The second thing that makes Chilla's art games so chilling, see what I did there, and unpredictable, is the aesthetic. No, I'm not talking about PlayStation 1 tier graphics. Instead, I want to draw your attention to the ingenious use of graphical artifacts that serve to limit your vision. In Inunaki Tunnel, for example, your character is viewing the world through an old camera, and it's just like found footage horror movie. The visual artifacts and noise blur your vision even further. In an already dark tunnel, your flashlight provides just enough illumination to navigate through this cursed tunnel, but its range is so limited that you never know what's out there, more than 10 feet ahead of you. Finally, there's the atmosphere in these games, which can tell the entire story by itself. One of my favorite choices to illustrate this point is your hometown in the convenience store. As you walk outside the door of your apartment for the first time, you're greeted with a pitch black sky and a landscape that consists of densely packed houses on a hilly slope. There's no signs of life in any of these houses, and the only lighting you have is provided by just few street lights are lined up along the long narrow road that leads to your destination, and the cones of light cast by these are muffled by a thick layer of fog that covers the entire town. You feel uneasy and powerless, with a weak little flashlight in your hand. As you descend the slope to get to your workplace, you discover a labyrinth network of stairs, lanes and walkways. It's almost like being in a maze, trapped with no way out. The only house with its light on is yours, further empathizing the fact that you're all alone here. The convenience store itself is like an obelisk built in the middle of a massive parking lot that's completely dark and empty. The store is so brightly lit, with no customers in sight and just one person at the desk. I love the foreboding nature of level design in Chilla's art games, as they set up the tone for the rest of the game from minute zero. It's almost a forgotten art these days, something that not even AAA companies with their bloated budgets can manage to accomplish. So, in conclusion, what makes a scary game? Much like fine dining, the best horror games are often the ones that focus on core ingredients, instead of indulging in vanity-fueled attempts to be edgy and extra scary. Sorry guys, the first two jump scares were alright, but after the 15th one, I'm really starting to wonder if you designed your product for an audience with the attention span of a concussed goldfish. Games like the Convenience Store and Inunaki Tunnel are stellar reminders of why less is more, because you usually don't feel scared when everything is lit up, like Capitol on New Year's Eve, unless you are afraid of fireworks. In the end, the actual scariest thing about Chilla's art games is going through the comments under the playthroughs of their games and seeing stories from women sharing their experiences about how something similar happened to them in real life.